The clinking of crystal against crystal was the only sound in the cavernous dining room. 20 feet of polished mahogany stretched between Naima and her father, Reginald, who sat at the head of the table like a king on a throne. The air, thick with the scent of roasted lamb and lilies, felt heavy, suffocating. Kieran sat beside Naima, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He wore his best suit, a simple charcoal gray that he'd had tailored years ago. It was pressed and clean, but next to the bespoke Italian silk of Naima's brother, it looked like what it was, the best a working man could afford. Reginald lifted his glass, the vintage Bordeaux swirling like dark blood. His eyes, cold and appraising, swept over the table and settled on Kieran. They did not just look at him, they assessed him, measured him, and found him wanting. Naima felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She had known this would be a trial. She hadn't realized it would be an execution. "A toast?" Reginald announced, his voice booming with the easy authority of a man who had never been told no. The other family members, her mother Eleanor, her brother Marcus, his perfectly manicured wife, all raised their glasses in unison, their faces a gallery of polite, predatory smiles. "To family," Reginald began, the traditional Easter opening, "and to the choices that define us." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. His gaze remained locked on Kieran, a surgeon's precise and merciless stare. "May we all strive to make better ones." The insult was so clean, so sharp, it was almost elegant. It sliced through the polite fiction of the dinner, laying bare the raw, ugly judgment beneath. "You are not good enough. You are a poor choice." Naima's hand trembled as she reached for her own glass. She wanted to scream, to overturn the table, to grab Kieran's hand and run from this mausoleum of a house she once called home. But she was frozen, a product of years of training to be silent, to be poised, to never make a scene. Kieran did not flinch. He did not look down. He simply met her father's gaze with a quiet, unshakable calm. The room held its breath, waiting for him to crumble. They had no idea that this quiet man, this carpenter from the other side of the city, was about to teach them all a lesson in what true wealth really was. And for Naima, it was the moment everything changed. His life and hers had been irrevocably intertwined from the moment of a different kind of breaking, months earlier. But this moment, this quiet stand against the crushing weight of expectation, was the one that would define their future. For the first time, someone was fighting for her without raising his voice, without needing to prove a single thing. He was simply being himself, and it was more powerful than all the money in that room combined. His world was one of wood grain and sunlight. Kieran's life began before dawn, in the quiet moments when the city of Philadelphia still slept. The first sound was the soft sigh of the old radiator in his small two-bedroom apartment, followed by the gentle patter of small feet. His daughter Amara would appear in his doorway, a 6-year-old silhouette clutching a worn, one-eyed stuffed lion named Rory. She never cried out, just stood there, a silent summons. And every morning Kieran would swing his legs out of bed, scoop her into his arms, and carry her to the kitchen, her small body warm and smelling of sleep. Their apartment was modest, nestled in a historically black neighborhood where the sounds of life spilled from open windows. It was a space filled not with things, but with evidence of love. Amara's crayon drawings were taped to the refrigerator, a vibrant collage of smiling suns and lopsided houses. A half-finished puzzle sat on the coffee table. On the wall by the door, a single framed photograph showed a smiling woman with kind eyes, her natural hair a beautiful crown of coils. Maya, Amara's mother, Kieran's late wife. The grief was a quiet resident in their home, not a ghost that haunted, but a presence that reminded. It was in the way Kieran sometimes paused while stirring pancake batter, his eyes distant. It was in the way Amara would occasionally whisper a question to the photograph before bed. "Mama would like my drawing, right, Daddy?" she'd ask. And Kieran's voice, always gentle, would reply, "She would love it more than anything, sweet girl." Cancer had taken her quickly, a thief in the night 3 years ago, splitting his life into a before and an after. He didn't perform his sorrow. He honored it by pouring every ounce of himself into the small, bright girl she had left behind. His hands, calloused and strong, were his trade. He was a carpenter, a master woodworker who ran a small, community-focused workshop called Grain and Grace. He didn't build disposable furniture. He restored memories. He could take a splintered rocking chair a grandmother had used to soothe 3 generations of babies and make it whole again. He saw the story in the wood, the history in its scars. His work was quiet, deliberate, and deeply honorable. It didn't make him rich, not in the way the world measured wealth. Some months paying the bills was a delicate dance of timing and faith. But when he locked the workshop door at night, the smell of sawdust on his clothes, and the satisfaction of a job well done in his heart, he felt a richness that no stock portfolio could provide. He was a tall black man with a quiet strength that radiated from him like warmth from a hearth. His grooming was deliberate, a freshly trimmed lineup, a clean-shaven face, clothes that were worn but always pressed. It was a quiet declaration of self-respect. He moved with an economy of motion, a patience that seemed to be in his very bones. He showed his love through action. Love was packing Amara's lunch, a silly note tucked inside. It was meticulously braiding her hair, the colorful beads clicking softly as she moved. It was the steady presence of a good man doing his best every single day without fanfare or complaint. He never asked for anything. His kindness was reflexive, a natural state of being. And it was this quiet, unassuming grace that would soon collide with a world that understood only power. Naima's world was one of glass and silence. Her penthouse apartment overlooked the Schuylkill River, a panorama of glittering city lights that felt more like a fortress than a home. The floors were Italian marble, the furniture was minimalist and severe, and the air was conditioned to a perfect, sterile 72 degrees. There were no crayon drawings on her sub-zero refrigerator. There were no worn stuffed animals on her king-sized bed. The only photograph on display was a corporate headshot on her desk, a picture of a powerful, elegant black woman with deep brown skin and natural hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her expression in the photo was one of cool, unassailable competence. It was the face she showed the world. It was also a mask. By day, she was Naima Sinclair, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. She commanded boardrooms with a quiet, precise intelligence that left her rivals scrambling. Her words were weapons. Her strategies were masterpieces of logic and foresight. She wore tailored suits that were a form of armor. Her posture impeccable. Her control absolute. She had fought her way to the top of a ruthless world, a world her father had groomed her for since she was a child. Sinclairs do not settle for second best, he would say, his approval always conditional, always just out of reach. She had achieved everything he'd ever demanded of her, and in doing so, had sacrificed the woman she might have been. Her loneliness was a physical presence in the vast, empty apartment. It was the echo of her footsteps on the marble floors. It was the silence that greeted her when she came home, long after her assistant had gone for the day. It was the single-place setting at her enormous dining table. She had colleagues, not friends. She had transactions, not relationships. Her last attempt at a partnership had ended disastrously with a man who had seen her as a conquest, another acquisition for his portfolio. He had not seen her. No one had. They saw the title, the power, the luminous beauty that she wielded like a shield. But the woman beneath, the one who sometimes yearned for the simple comfort of a shared meal or a hand to hold in the dark, remained invisible. Her wound was the quiet, gnawing belief that she was loved for what she did, not for who she was. Her parents' pride was tethered to her stock price, her public victories. Their calls were never just to check in, they were interrogations about quarterly earnings and market positions. She was brilliant, powerful, and utterly, profoundly alone. She had built a kingdom of glass and steel, only to find herself its solitary prisoner. She had curated a life of perfect success, and it was emotionally bankrupt. And she was beginning to realize in the quiet, terrifying hours after midnight that it was not enough. It would never be enough. Their two worlds collided over a piece of broken history. The desk in Naima's corner office was not some sleek, modern monstrosity. It was a 19th century mahogany pedestal desk, a family heirloom passed down from her great-grandmother. It was the one piece of authentic warmth in her sterile corporate environment. One Tuesday afternoon, during a tense negotiation, a junior executive leaned too heavily against it, and with a sickening crack, one of the ornate carved legs splintered. The sound was more violent to Naima than a gunshot. The negotiation ended abruptly. Her facilities department sent up their best people, men who were experts in chrome and glass. They looked at the antique wood with bafflement and declared it irreparable. "We can order you a new one, Ms. Sinclair," the manager said, gesturing to a catalog of soulless designer desks. "No," Naima said, her voice clipped and final. The desk was the only thing in her life that felt connected to a real past, to a time before everything became a transaction. It was her youngest assistant, a bright young woman from West Philly, who timidly offered a solution. "My uncle, he knows a guy," she'd stammered. "He's not a corporate vendor, but he's an artist with wood. His name is Kieran." Naima, desperate, agreed. The next day, Kieran walked into her office. He was not what she expected. He didn't wear a uniform, just simple work pants and a clean cotton shirt. He carried a soft leather tool roll, not a clanking metal box. He was a tall black man, and his presence was immediately calming, a pocket of quiet in her high-strung world. He didn't seem impressed by the panoramic view or the expensive art on the walls. His focus was entirely on the broken desk. He knelt, his large, capable hands running over the splintered wood with a reverence that startled her. He didn't just look at the break. He studied the grain, the color, the way the original craftsman had joined the pieces. He was listening to the wood. "I can fix this," he said, his voice low and certain. "But I have to take the leg back to my shop. I need to match the wood, the stain. It has to be done right." For the next week, he became a quiet fixture in her life. He would arrive in the late afternoon, after the chaos of the trading day had subsided, to work on reattaching and finishing the leg. He worked in silence, with a focused intensity that Naima found herself watching from her chair. He never made small talk, never tried to flatter her. He simply did his work. One evening, he was finishing the final polish. The sun was setting, casting long, golden rays across her office. Naima had been staring at a spreadsheet for 3 hours, and her head was throbbing. She hadn't realized she'd been rubbing her temples until he spoke. "Long day," he said. It wasn't a question. "The longest," she sighed, dropping her hand. He finished his work and began packing his tools. He paused, then looked at her. "You have a little ink right here." He gestured gently toward his own cheek. Naima's hand flew to her face, flustered. She had been in meetings all day, with a smudge of pen on her cheek like a child. No one had told her. Her colleagues, her assistants, They were all too intimidated or too indifferent to mention such a human imperfection. Kieran just gave a small, kind smile. It happens. He finished packing and stood to leave. The desk should be stronger than it was before, he said. Be well, Ms. Sinclair. And then he was gone. Naima walked over to the desk and ran her hand over the repaired leg. The seam was invisible. The wood felt warm and alive. She stood there for a long time, in the silent, darkening office, and for the first time in years, she felt a crack in the armor she had so carefully constructed. He had not seen the CEO. He had seen a tired woman with an ink smudge on her face, and he had offered a moment of simple, uncomplicated human kindness. It was a currency her world did not trade in, and she found, to her astonishment, that she was desperate for more. She cried that night, not from sadness or stress, but from the shocking relief of being seen. The desk was the beginning. Naima found herself inventing reasons to visit Grain and Grace. First, she commissioned a set of custom bookshelves for her apartment, a deliberate act of bringing something warm and handmade into her cold, curated space. She would drive to his workshop, a small, tidy space that smelled wonderfully of cedar and coffee, leaving her gleaming Mercedes parked on a street of row homes and community gardens. The workshop was Kieran's kingdom, and in it, he was a different man. Not just quiet, but deeply centered, his movements fluid and sure, as he guided a piece of maple through a saw or smoothed a rough edge with a plane. But the real transformation happened when a small, bright-eyed girl with braids and colorful beads would burst through the door after school. "Daddy!" Amara would shout, launching herself into his arms. And Kieran would melt, the focused craftsman disappearing into a laughing, loving father. He would lift her up, her beaded braids bouncing, and her giggles would fill the dusty air. Naima would watch from the doorway, a silent, captivated observer. She had never witnessed such unguarded affection. In her world, love was a negotiation. Here, it was as natural and essential as breathing. Amara, with the unfiltered curiosity of a child, was immediately fascinated by Naima. "Why do you wear such pointy shoes?" she asked one afternoon, pointing at Naima's stilettos. Naima, caught off guard, looked down at her expensive, impractical shoes. They make me feel tall." "But you're already tall," Amara said, with perfect kid logic. "My daddy is tall too. He wears boots, so he doesn't get sawdust in his toes." Kieran would gently redirect his daughter's interrogation, but the damage was done. Naima began to see her own world through the child's clear eyes. The pointy shoes, the stiff suits, the silent apartment. It all started to feel less like success and more like a cage. The bonding happened in small, unglamorous moments. One Saturday, Naima arrived to find Kieran trying to make pancakes, a cloud of flour dusting his shirt. Amara was directing him from a stool. "No, Daddy. Mama said you have to flip it now." One pancake was burnt. Another was shaped like a strange amoeba. Kieran looked up, a little embarrassed, as Naima entered. "We're experimenting," he said with a wry smile. On impulse, Naima took off her designer jacket, rolled up her silk sleeves, and said, "I think I remember how to do this." She spent the next hour in the small, warm kitchen, making pancakes with a man and his daughter. They were imperfect, some a little lopsided, but as the three of them sat at the small wooden table, sharing a meal and laughing as Amara got syrup on her nose, Naima felt a sense of belonging that her father's grand mahogany table had never once provided. Slowly, the walls came down. He told her about Maya, not with dramatic grief, but with a quiet, loving reverence. He spoke of her kindness, her laugh, the way she had taught him to see the beauty in small things. He shared his wound, not as a bid for pity, but as a fact of his life, a part of the story that made him who he was. In return, Naima found herself speaking of things she had never told anyone. She spoke of the crushing weight of her father's expectations, of the gnawing feeling of never being good enough, of the profound loneliness of her success. In the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by the scent of wood and the evidence of a life built by hand, her corporate language fell away, replaced by simple, human truth. "I don't think my father has ever told me he's proud of me," she confessed one evening, her voice barely a whisper. "He just points out the next mountain to climb." Kieran didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He just listened, his dark eyes filled with a deep, empathetic understanding. He reached across the space between them and gently placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm and steady, a simple gesture, a silent promise. "I see you." The true turning point was a gift from Amara. Naima arrived at the workshop one day to find the little girl concentrating fiercely at a small table, her tongue sticking out from the corner of her mouth. She was drawing. When she finished, she ran over to Naima and proudly held up her creation. It was a stick figure drawing. On the left was a tall man with brown skin and short hair. In the middle, a small girl with brown skin and beaded braids holding a yellow balloon. And on the right, holding the little girl's other hand, was a tall woman with brown skin and natural hair pulled into a bun. Underneath, in wobbly letters, Amara had written, "My daddy and me and Naima." Naima stared at the piece of paper, her throat tight. A drawing, a simple crayon drawing. But it was more than that. It was an invitation. It was an acceptance. It was a child's innocent, hopeful vision of a family. In a world that only valued her for her power and her wealth, this little girl had seen her and had drawn her into their circle of love without a single condition. Naima knelt and hugged the small, warm body, burying her face in the girl's hair, and fought back tears. The child had named the relationship before the adults even dared to. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the calligraphy a testament to her mother's impeccable and intimidating taste. "Eleanor and Reginald Sinclair request the pleasure of your company for Easter dinner." At the bottom, a handwritten note from her mother. "We're so looking forward to finally meeting the man you've been spending so much time with. Please bring him." The words were polite, but Naima could read the subtext. It was not an invitation, it was a summons, a command performance. Kieran was to be presented, inspected, and judged. The dread was immediate and suffocating. Her family's world and Kieran's were not just different, they were fundamentally opposed. Her parents measured a person's worth by their net worth, their pedigree, the name on their business card. Kieran's worth was in his character, his craft, his quiet dignity. She knew with a sickening certainty that they would not see him. They would see his worn work boots, his modest income, his lack of connections. They would see him as a project, a misstep, a phase she was going through. "We don't have to go," she told Kieran, twisting the expensive card in her hands. They were sitting on the porch of his apartment building, watching the evening settle over the neighborhood. Amara was chasing fireflies on the small patch of grass below. Kieran watched her, his expression calm. "You're scared of what they'll think of me." "I'm scared of what they'll do to you," she corrected, her voice tight. "They're cruel, Kieran. They can strip a person down with a single sentence. I've seen them do it." She didn't want to subject him to that. She didn't want to see the warmth in his eyes dimmed by their casual, calculated condescension. He was silent for a long moment, watching his daughter's joyful dance. "Amara asks about your family sometimes," he said quietly. "She draws pictures of them. She gives them all big smiles." He turned to look at Naima, his gaze steady and deep. I'm not afraid of them, Naima. The only thing that matters to me is what you think, and what that little girl down there thinks. He nodded toward the lawn. Are you ashamed of me? The question was so direct, so devoid of accusation, that it pierced through her fear. No, she whispered, the answer immediate and absolute. Never. Then we'll go, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Let them see who you've chosen. Let them see us. His courage gave her a sliver of hope. But as the day approached, her anxiety grew. She found herself trying to prepare him, to coach him on which forks to use, on her father's favorite topics, on how to deflect her mother's probing questions. He listened patiently and then gently stopped her. Naima, he said, taking her hands in his, I know how to eat a meal. I know how to talk to people. I'm just going to be myself. If that's not good enough for them, then that's a reflection on them, not on me. He was right, of course. But as she stood in the marble-floored foyer of her parents' home, with Kieran's steady hand on the small of her back, and Amara tucked safely away for the evening with a trusted sitter, her childhood fears returned with a vengeance. The house itself seemed to judge them, the ancestral portraits on the walls staring down with silent disapproval. The threat wasn't a corporate takeover or a market crash. It was something far more intimate and terrifying, the potential humiliation of the man she was falling in love with, and the fear that her family's poison would be strong enough to destroy the most authentic thing she had ever found. The dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Naima's mother, Eleanor, spoke of a recent charity auction, listing the multi-million-dollar bids with a casual air, her eyes flicking to Kieran as if to highlight the chasm between their worlds. Her brother Marcus steered the conversation to his latest venture capital success, using jargon so dense it was clearly meant to exclude and intimidate. Through it all, Kieran remained serene. He answered their questions with simple, honest dignity. "And what is it you do, Kieran?" Eleanor asked, her tone suggesting she was inquiring about a curious hobby. "I'm a woodworker," he replied calmly. "I own a small business in West Philadelphia. We restore furniture and build custom pieces." "Oh, how quaint," she said, the word dripping with condescension. Reginald had been mostly silent, observing Kieran like a hawk studying its prey. Now he leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "A trade," he said, the word hanging in the air. "Honorable in its own way, but hardly a foundation for a future. Naima is used to a certain standard of living, a certain level of ambition." The implication was clear. You cannot provide for her. You cannot keep up. And then came the toast. Reginald raised his glass. "To family," he boomed, "and to the choices that define us. May we all strive to make better ones." The silence that followed was thick with malice. Naima felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Kieran, expecting to see him wounded, diminished, but he simply placed his napkin on the table, his movements deliberate, and slowly rose to his feet. He picked up his water glass. He did not look angry. He did not look defensive. He looked like the calmest, strongest man Naima had ever seen. "May I propose a toast as well?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the silent room. Reginald gave a magnanimous, patronizing wave of his hand. "By all means." Kieran's eyes met Naima's for a brief second, a look of reassurance passing between them. Then he looked at her father. "You're right, sir," he began, his voice even and respectful. "Our choices do define us. But I think we sometimes get confused about what constitutes a better choice." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the opulent room, the untouched plates of exquisite food, the faces arrayed against him. "I've learned that the best choices aren't the ones that lead to the biggest house or the most impressive title. Those things are temporary. They can be lost. I've learned that from losing someone I loved very much. A flicker of his own past pain crossed his face, raw and authentic. My wife, Maya, she taught me that real wealth is measured in things you can't put on a balance sheet. It's the choice to be patient when you're tired. The choice to be kind when the world is not. It's the choice to build something with your own two hands. Not because it will make you famous, but because it will be useful and beautiful to someone else. He looked directly at Reginald, his quiet dignity a shield against the man's immense power. My daughter, Amara, she teaches me every day about better choices. She chooses to forgive quickly. She chooses to love without condition. She chooses to see the good in everyone, even when the adults around her have forgotten how. His voice grew softer, more intimate, as his eyes found Naima's again. The most important choice we ever get to make, he said, his voice thick with emotion, is who we see. Truly see. Not their resume, not their bank account, their heart. And when you are lucky enough to find someone who sees you back, that isn't just a better choice. It's a blessing. It's everything. He raised his glass. So I'd like to toast to real choices, to kindness, to legacy, to seeing and being seen. He took a sip of water and then, with a small, polite nod, he sat back down. The silence that followed was different. It was not tense. It was stunned. Kieran had not fought them on their terms. He had not argued about money or status. He had simply and profoundly changed the definition of victory. He had shown them a world of value they didn't know existed, and in doing so, had exposed the poverty of their own. Naima looked at him, and her heart felt like it would burst. He had not just defended himself, he had defended her. He had defended the possibility of a different kind of life. In that moment, her choice was made. Not a better choice, a real one. She reached under the table and her hand found his. She squeezed it, a silent, fervent promise. I see you. I choose you. They left soon after. The goodbyes were stiff and brief. Naima's father couldn't meet her eye. Her mother offered a brittle smile. The battle was over, and they knew, somehow, that they had lost. The moment the doors of the Mercedes closed, sealing them in a cocoon of leather and silence, the composure Naima had maintained all evening shattered. A sob escaped her, thick and ragged. Tears she had held back for years began to stream down her face. Naima, Kieran said softly, his voice full of concern. He put the car in drive but didn't pull away from the curb. I'm so sorry, she wept, turning to him. I'm so sorry I put you through that. They were awful, horrible. Hey, he said, his voice a low rumble. He reached over and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was infinitely tender. Look at me. She forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were not angry or hurt. They were full of a deep, unwavering love. It's okay, he whispered. You have nothing to be sorry for. But they don't matter, he said with quiet finality. They're just noise. What we have, what we're building, that's the real thing. He drove them away from the grand, empty mansion, through the manicured streets of the suburbs, and back toward the city, back toward the realness of his world. The farther they got from her parents' house, the more the tension in Naima's shoulders began to ease. She leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city lights blur past. He didn't take her back to her sterile penthouse. He drove them to his small, warm apartment. When they walked in, the first thing she saw was Amara's drawing on the refrigerator, a bright beacon of hope. The sitter was dozing on the couch, and Kieran paid her quietly, walking her to the door with a soft word of thanks. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Amara's soft breathing from her bedroom. Kieran went to the kitchen and came back with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. He handed one to Naima and sat beside her on the worn, comfortable sofa. It wasn't designer, it wasn't new, but it felt more like home than any piece of furniture she owned. They sat in a comfortable silence for a long time, sipping their tea. The noise of her family, of her corporate life, of her father's disapproval, all of it faded away, replaced by the profound peace of this small, love-filled room. Naima looked around at the stacks of books, the half-finished puzzle, the scent of sawdust and cinnamon that seemed to linger in the air. This was a life, a real, tangible, beautiful life. She had spent decades climbing a ladder only to find it was leaning against the wrong wall. She put her mug down and turned to him. The words came from a place deep inside her, a place she had kept locked away for years. They were simple, stripped of all artifice. "I just want to stay," she said, her voice raw with vulnerability. It wasn't a declaration of love in the traditional sense, but it was more powerful. It was a declaration of belonging. It was a choice. Kieran's expression softened. A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. He reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her jaw. He leaned in and kissed her, not with passion, but with a deep, soulful tenderness. It was a kiss of acceptance, of homecoming. It was the answer to a question she hadn't even realized she had been asking her whole life. In the quiet of his living room, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, Naima finally felt seen, and she knew she was home. 3 months later, the late summer sun cast a golden glow over the community garden behind Kieran's workshop. The air was alive with the buzz of bees and the laughter of children. Naima knelt in a patch of rich, dark earth, her hands, once accustomed only to board reports and fountain pens, now covered in soil. She was wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, her natural hair free from its usual severe bun, her deep brown skin luminous in the afternoon light. She was tending to a row of unruly tomato plants, a small, genuine smile on her face. Her life had been fundamentally rearranged. She hadn't abandoned her career, but she had reshaped it. She stepped down as CEO, taking a strategic role that allowed her to mentor young entrepreneurs, particularly women of color. She sold the cavernous penthouse and moved into a brownstone a few blocks from Kieran, a home with a small yard and enough room for a child's swing set. She was learning the rhythm of a different kind of life, one dictated by school pickups and weekend farmers markets, not by stock market bells. Kieran was nearby, showing a group of neighborhood kids how to build a birdhouse, his patient voice a steady, comforting presence. But the garden was Naima's project. It was her way of putting down roots, of cultivating something real and alive. Amara ran up to her, her beaded braids swinging, her hands held carefully behind her back. "I have a surprise for you, Naima," she announced, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Oh yeah?" Naima said, turning to give the little girl her full attention. "What is it?" Amara brought her hands forward. On her palm was a simple bracelet made of small, smooth, wooden beads, each one glowing with a soft polish. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. "Daddy made it," Amara explained, her voice breathless with importance. "He said the wood is from a cherry tree, and cherry trees mean new beginnings. He said this means you're staying forever." The little girl looked up, her expression a mixture of hope and childish gravity. "Are you staying forever?" Naima's breath caught in her throat. She looked from the bracelet in Amara's small hand to Kieran, who had stopped his work and was watching them, a hopeful, nervous smile on his face. This was it. Not a grand proposal on one knee with a diamond ring, but something infinitely more precious. A question from a child, a gift from a craftsman, a promise of a future built by hand. Tears welled in Naima's eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She held out her wrist, and Amara carefully, proudly, slipped the bracelet on. It felt warm against her skin. She looked at Kieran, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. She didn't need to say the words. He could see the answer in her shining eyes, but she gave it to him anyway. A gift for him and his daughter. She looked down at Amara, and then her gaze lifted to meet Kieran's across the sun-dappled garden. "Forever," she whispered, and the narrator knew that in the end, the greatest fortunes are not found in boardrooms or bank vaults. They are found in quiet moments of connection, in the courage to choose love over approval, and in the profound, life-altering grace of being truly seen. Family is not always the one you are born into. Sometimes it is the one you are brave enough to build, one small, imperfect, beautiful choice at a time.